So should I start?
Yes.
Okay. Namaste and greetings. I, Riya Rawat, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today marks the day 2 of Law and Public Policy Youth Fellowship Cohort 4.0 Winter 2024 with the theme Inclusivity in Peace and Conflict Resolution, Rethinking Policy, Advocacy and Implementation. An online national winter school program, a 3-month immersive online law and public policy awareness certificate training course and internship program. This program is organized by IMPRI Center for Human Dignity and Development, New Delhi. This program, the chair for this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished professor IMPRI. The lead advisor and legal hands-on sessions expert is Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam ji, visiting senior fellow IMPRI, advocate, author, and researcher, gender and human rights. The conveners for this course are Dr. Ajay Gudavarthi, Advocate Celine Thomas, Dr. Simi Mehta, and Dr. Arjun Kumar. The expert panel for today includes Professor Swaran ji, Professor and Chairperson, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Gladstone Xavier, Faculty and former Head, Social Work Department, Loyola College, Chennai. Professor Ceena Paul, Professor, Department of Economics, MD Shah College for Women, Mumbai. We will also share the course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind attention. Before we start today's session, I would like to state the housekeeping announcements. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions on the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. To begin today's session, I would like to invite our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished Professor IMPRI, to give her opening remarks. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you, Riya Rawat, for these introductory remarks. And I would first of all like to express my heartfelt thanks to the conveners of this program, Dr. Simi Mehta, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Ajay Gudavarthi, and Advocate Celine Thomas. And I welcome today's expert, Professor Swaran Singh, Dr. Gladston Xavier, and Dr. Ceena Paul, and esteemed participants. A brief recap of day one, and we all began with the inaugural session and also gave an overview of the concerns of this particular course, where we see social inclusion in peace negotiations as an agenda item, which has gained increasing importance in politics, policy formulation, norms, and also scholarship. And we began with the landmark agreements in the post-World War period. First of all, the Oslo Agreement of 1993, which talked about Palestine's self-determination. The second one was the Belfast Agreement in 1998, which stopped violence in both Northern Ireland and England. And the third one was the Colombian Peace Agreement, where the feminists have played a very important role. 1,000 feminists signed for feminist foreign policy, which should be pacifist. And it also expanded the understanding of peace because it focused on peace with justice, and it talked about comprehensive rural reforms, political participation, ending of armed conflict, illicit drugs, transitional justice for the victims, and also the reconciliation and prevention of new forms of violence, and also monitoring by the civil society, state and non-state actor. The first inaugural speech was by Mr. Sandeep Chachra. He spoke on decolonizing the peace building and democracy and the views from Global South, where he talked, he began with the definition of decolonization, which was extremely popular during 70s and 80s, which were by Professor Samir Amin, where 4 aspects of decolonization. One is whole neocolonialism, how to create alternative strategies to fight that. Decolonization of currency and economic integration based on national currencies, and no to sanction countries, where at that time, like Cuba, has been sanctioned for such a long time. Right from the time of liberation struggles, and decolonization of global systems, where he also quoted Frantz Fanon's Decolonizing Mind, and he also talked about the question of, he derided spawn slogans in the name of decolonization and demanded that we need to make it very, very substantive and whole fight against the challenges which and challenge the boundaries of democracy that is beyond formal democracy, and talked about self-governance and egalitarianism. The second presentation, extremely powerful and data-driven, and a lot of case studies and personal anecdotes were also shared by Ms. Rita Manchanda on redefining agency and resilience, narrativizing women, war, and peace in South Asia. She being involved in the peace negotiations for and working with the refugees for more than 4 decades. She talked about the expansion of understanding of military security, feminist scholarship, she mentioned, which has visibilized local women's agency. She talked about agency and networking at transnational, regional, national, and local level. And she also emphasized the role of civil society organizations in the implementation of 1325 resolution, that means WPS agenda. And she also emphasized the WPS agenda thirst as a very important responsibility for the which gives a major responsibility to women's collective, but it doesn't give any material support. So we also need to make WPS agenda far more substantive. And then today we have 3 equally erudite and experts on this subject who are going to enlighten us. Over to IMPRI team.
Thank you, ma'am, for your remarks. Without any further delay, I would like to invite Professor Swaran Singh ji, an esteemed expert in international relations and policy, for his address on new frontiers in global peace, inclusive policy making for cyber conflict resolution. We warmly welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Priya. I hope I am able to be heard loud and clear. I understand it's a very interesting theme of inclusivity on peace and conflict resolution, which your young scholars are going to be engaged in this course. I thought before we come to the specifics, and indeed I always feel much comfortable answering questions, knowing that at least one of your fellows has a very specific interest to which I can respond. I'll be more than happy to see that if they have questions, I am answering them in detail to their satisfaction. But I will make some initial remarks about this larger subject of global peace that you mentioned is my topic for discussion today. But inclusivity in global peace becoming increasingly a subject of attention. And I assume most of your fellows definitely are much younger to me. I always begin with younger people by giving example of how each of you in your families have developed your own very special language. For example, if any visitor is coming to your home, maybe you and your brother or sister just glance at each other and communicate something about the visitor without speaking even a single word. And then, of course, each family has its own very special words which have enormous meanings. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this to draw your attention to the fact that if in your family, in your early 20s, you have very special body language and very special words with very specific connotations, imagine human race and different civilizations. They all have developed different words for peace. Each language has some word for peace. But each language, particularly languages which are ancient languages, have very distinct connotations of when they say peace, or in Hindi you will say shanti, or let's say you're saying shalom in Hebrew. They mean different things for people in their imaginations. And that is why inclusivity is very important. If we only have imagination of peace in terms of Indian understanding of Shanti, maybe that is not how other societies, other civilizations understand. And increasingly, there is a scholar called Takeshi Ishida. He has done work on different ancient civilizations and how they differently understand peace and how they have different words for peace. For example, in Chinese, there are two words which are close to peace, ping ho and ho ping. Similarly, Japanese also have two words, heiwa and chowa. Heiwa means peace, chowa means harmony. In India also, Shanti and Ahimsa sometimes are seen very closely related. Our imagination of Shanti includes too much focus on non-violence, for example, particularly in modern India, post-independence India, too much focus on that. Also, peace is understood differently in different civilizations, not only in the words they use, the meanings they attach to it, but different strategies as to how each of these societies wish to achieve peace, how they wish to sustain peace, how they wish to build the peace that they imagine differently from each other. So they have different imaginations and different ways of ensuring peace, building peace, obtaining peace. Most of the Oriental civilizations, for example, are usually influenced by spiritual narratives. And for them, peace usually is more focused on inward looking, inner peace. Not external peace, but internal peace. Shanti, for example, is about me being at peace with myself. So that means it's a very different meaning compared to meaning in Greek civilization. Greek civilization word for peace is pax. And pax is also very close to the English word order or orderliness. So just like for one particular civilization, it is inner peace, for other, the peace ensured by external orderliness. Similarly, all the theories in international relations, they also understand peace differently. Not just different societies understand differently and have different methodologies of how they want to build peace before we go to global peace, because everyone have their different imagination of peace. And everyone has different strategy of how to achieve, ensure, sustain peace. Likewise, theorists also have different imaginations of peace. For example, the theorists that come closest to peace in international relations would usually be called idealists. Idealist theory or theory of idealism. Sometimes they are also called utopians. Sometimes they also include people who talk about creating a world government, because they assume that peace lies in harmony. There are going to be frictions, there is going to be diversity, but can we build unity in diversity? Can we have harmony where different musical notes together make music rather than making noise? So if there is a complementarity in these different, diverse imaginations of peace, idealists believe that maybe we can create complementarity in such a fashion that we can create imagination of global peace. But that's not easy, because after Second World War, there's a whole era of McCarthyism. Some of you may have heard of a hippie movement, where young generation, disillusioned by 6 years long destructive war, thought psychotropic drugs can be a good method to achieve peace. So idealists then were questioned whether world is real, and is world ready to be nice to each other? Is world ready to build complementarity and harmony? Or is the world still trying to fight with each other? Because they have different imaginations. We don't have world government. Every nation state wants to do things in a different fashion. So the other theory, which is sometimes called mainstream theory, is realism. Realists believe peace is not something which is there and you have made it and forget it. Peace, you have to work every day. And they believe that for peace, you have to get prepared for war. For them, war is the only guarantee that you can have peace. War is an instrument of peace. In fact, they also say that all wars in human history were fought in the name of peace. All wars were fought so that we can make peace. We can ensure no more we'll have problems. We'll have peaceful relationship after the war. But then if war was able to give us peace, then why it is that we have to fight wars again and again and again and again? That means even war is not a solution. It cannot create global peace. It even cannot create national peace or bilateral peace. So then we have another theory, systems theory, behavioral theory, empiricism in international relations. They believe that orderliness is important because they look at systems analysis and they believe that for systems like political system, social system to work in an orderly fashion is a guarantee of peace. For example, if you know that your train will come on time, your leave will be sanctioned on time, your certificates will be issued on time, your exams will happen on time, all institutions are working in an orderly fashion, then perhaps we will have society at peace, because you know whatever you are trying to expect will be delivered. Now, that is an imagination of the kind which believes that system will also alert you if there are minor problems. So you don't have to fight a war that realists want you to fight. Systems will have mechanisms which will tell you that there is a problem which is likely to come. And before problem becomes too big, you will solve it. For example, when you drive your car, if it makes a little noise, you go to mechanic and he tells you there is a little problem here and I will solve it. So systems theories believe that small little doses of violence will alert societies and societies will respond to it. For example, at some stage, slavery was abolished, because at some stage, slavery looked like a bad thing. Till some time in history, slavery was okay. But once humans developed machine slaves, then the human slaves were seen as stigma. And society decided to do away with slavery. Likewise, women's rights. Till some time, women were not given all the rights, particularly political rights. And then at some stage, women movement, women liberation forced people to. So systems theorists believe that you don't have to go to war. small little protests, some small little anger, small little violence will alert you that there is a problem and you need to solve it. And therefore, you will be constantly able to build peace. Then, of course, you also heard another theory called constructivists. Constructivists believe that world around us is there because we imagine it to be there. Otherwise, it is not there. If I close my eyes, the screen is no longer there in front of me. But when I open my eyes, I see, I understand what is going on. Then I'm aware of what is going on around me. And they believe that all our ways of life are dependent on what they call intersubjective understandings. Through our communications, we are helping each other all the time around the world to understand things that mean same to you and me. For example, if I were to say inflation, or if I was to say nuclear deterrence, or if I was to say caste system, we have developed expressions where you and me share the same understanding. And they believe that that is what will ensure good communication with each other, constantly trying to build shared understandings, will ensure peace. And some of them also talk about emancipation and empowerment, but critical theory talks about these much more. The critical theories or critical security theories also have a different understanding of peace, because they say peace is what is dictated by the power elite. It is the powers that decide what peace means. For example, in 20th century, two superpowers, Soviet Union and United States, made the whole world understand that 50 to 70,000 nuclear weapons is a guarantee for peace. And we all agreed with them. This is called nuclear deterrence. So many weapons can destroy our planet not once, but several times. But the powers made us understand that those 50,000 nuclear weapons are actually meant to ensure our peace. So critical theorists talk about power-knowledge nexus. That only that knowledge will survive, only that knowledge will be accepted, rewarded, celebrated if it serves the interest of powers that be. And therefore, for them, this dictation of what peace is by the powerful is not real peace, because it only represents peace as understood by few powerful countries or people. In caste system, for example, only few people had access to scriptures. Only they told what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. Now, critical theorists believe that that leaves the whole large part of the pyramid, large part of society suffering, because that's not their peace. That is a peace defined by few powerful people. And therefore, they talk of emancipation and empowerment as a method of making peace, building peace, ensuring peace. Likewise, many different theories. What I'm underlining is the importance of this theme of inclusivity in global peace and conflict resolution, because then only we can understand how we have to deal with cybersecurity, which is making us all come together on the same platform. So whether you are from Argentina or you are from um, Estonia or Algeria or India, internet space is similar. And that is where we are now all accessing that common space, which is in some ways empowering us. We have access to information, if not knowledge, like never before. That means all over the world, cyberspace is empowering common people, institutions, nations. But because conceptions of peace are different, we are also now facing each other on that shared common cyberspace, face to face, sharing our diverse understandings of peace. Earlier, let us say the Chinese were in China and Greek were in Greece. They could survive with their different imaginations of peace in their own areas. Very few people will travel from China to Greece or Greece to China. Now, people are connecting on cyberspace, and they are not just reflecting and sharing their diverse understandings of what is peace for them. There is also no regulation as of now on cyberspace. Very little. Nations are trying to make. India has, for example, Information Technology Act of 2008, which is amended many times till 2022. Many nations are trying to create, and that regulation has created a big debate about my right to private freedom and my national security. My individual liberty versus national security. Nation wants to put regulations and controls on social media, which people say is interfering in my personal freedom to say things. And when they say things, they put on the cyberspace very diverse imaginations of what peace means. And that is making the world much more aware of contradictions in their understanding. For example, in Western societies, there is something called just war. That means for making peace, you're allowed to use violence. But in Occidental cultures like India, China, ancient civilizations believed that peace is actually inner peace. And therefore, you don't have to have any violence. The only violence you could inflict maybe is if you are trying to do fasting to purify your soul. But that is coercion upon yourself. It's not a coercion on others. But just war means coercion on others to make sure they follow the same idea of peace as we understand. So the fundamental challenge of inclusivity, therefore, is that we have a whole range of understandings of what peace means. And then in peace studies now, the third part. In peace studies also, for example, at end of Second World War, there was a very famous book called A Study of War by Quincy Wright, who said all wars he studied were wars that were fought for peace, for creating order and peace. But sometimes if you take simple example of idealists saying peace is harmony, realists saying peace is getting ready for war, then you have systems theorists saying peace is orderliness, constructivists saying it is shared communications to develop intersubjective understandings, critical theory saying it is emancipation. Even their imaginations are contradictory. An orderly classroom maybe will be that all of you come in uniform. But that may not be justice because some of you don't like to come in uniform. That may not create harmony. So even conceptions by theorists of modern times of what peace means has problems in creating that inclusivity, which is the theme of your cohort this time, cohort 4. So scholars in peace studies, which I was saying is the third part of my discussion, have also initially imagined that peace means absence of war, absence of violence. But then what is violence? See, some scholars later said we don't have a correct understanding of violence. You want to say absence of violence, and to ensure that violence, you should know what is violence to ensure its absence. Maybe it is there and you say, oh, poverty is finished, because you're not looking at poor people. They're still there. Similarly, violence may be there, but I might think, oh, there's no violence. So they start saying that absence of violence, absence of peace is not enough. You have to have deeper understanding of violence. Violence which is not simple physical violence, where you see somebody bleeding, somebody is fractured, somebody's arm broken, or somebody died. But violence could also be violence in the mind. You could have a very abusive relationship in a family or in office, between boss and subordinate, between teacher and student, where no physical harm has happened, but there is a mental torture happening. But more than these individual relationships, our social structures also create such violence. For example, caste system makes somebody superior or inferior simply by birth, which is unfair. And no one thinks that is violence. It is violence because it is constantly discriminating one against the other. It is therefore impacting upon the potential of one against the other. If you give same question paper to two young people without them knowing their caste, maybe you will get different answers, but give same question paper and tell in face of each other their caste. Maybe you will get different answers because you have shaken somebody's confidence. So someone has to be brave to overcome those discriminations. Similarly, in class system also, rich versus poor, again, problems. So imaginations of violence has to change, and a very good scholar, Johann Galtung, talks about structural violence, that there are violence in our structures. You see, all powerful people, whether it is politicians or it is religious people or it is business leaders, look at the buildings in which they live. The buildings themselves reflect power. Most of these buildings traditionally, for example, had many stairs in front of the building, as if you are going to meet the god. And then at end of stairs, they will have some pillars or inordinately large, huge doors. The man is maybe 6 feet, but door is 30 feet. Why? So our structures, physical, not only social structures, even physical structures show that discrimination. Make somebody feel big, make somebody feel small. And that is also violence, according to Johann Galtung, which he calls structural violence. And he says, if we are only looking at violence in terms of physical violence, then we are only trying to build negative peace. If we are able to focus on structural, social, cultural violence, then we are trying to build positive peace, which means for positive peace, there must be some positive conditions, not just neutral conditions. If I am neutral between a giant and a pygmy fighting with each other, then I am not really neutral. I am obviously favoring the giant who will beat up the pygmy. So if we are able to focus on these structures, cultural, social, physical structures that create that violence, which is invisible violence, which is more like influence, then we will be able to build positive peace. So there are whole diverse theories, whole diverse definitions, whole diverse semantics from different civilizations, which make creating inclusive peace a challenging task. Among others, Mahatma Gandhi tried to experiment with creating this inclusivity, what he called hybridization of peace. So he wanted to bring together Oriental understanding of inner peace and Occidental understanding of peace in action. So he created something called non-violent direct action. So stay non-violent, but take direct action like protesting or stopping, for example, sale of liquor, stopping young children's marriage, stopping widows not being allowed to marry again. So be active, don't be inactive, because it's not just mental peace you're thinking for yourself in terms of inner peace, you're thinking to create peace as a social force. And for that, you need direct action, but that direct action must remain non-violent. So this idea of love for individual from Christianity to inner peace from Indian tradition, he combined these and created an idea of non-violent direct action, which was one experiment, which was also followed in United States by the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, 1950s, applied non-violent direct action also. In his example, in Occident, just war is allowed. So direct action was already allowed. He wanted to emphasize that our direct action must be non-violent. So Martin Luther King Jr. added non-violence to direct action. Gandhi added direct action to non-violence. So this hybridization was an attempt to how to create inclusivity. How much time I have to speak? I mean, I want to give some time to students actually.
Sir, about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, let me mention about conflict resolution, because big theme is about inclusivity, about global peace and conflict resolution. Conflict, likewise, is very interesting. See, we are now celebrating about 100 years of international relations. And international relations as a discipline in education usually starts from First World War. Throughout the century, international relations remained focused on war and peace, two important issues international relations were dealing with. Gradually, particularly from end of the Cold War, international relations have also started focusing on what lies in between of these two pillars, war on one side, peace on the other. And they saw that the whole spectrum of this place between war and peace is an area which is filled by conflict. And therefore, we should not only wake up when there is a war and then try to make peace, we should also keep looking at the conflicts that exist. These conflicts may be dormant. I mean, they may not be visible. For example, child doesn't know that his hand will burn if he puts it in fire. Mother and father know it. So sometimes conflicts are not known to us. They are dormant. They are not impacting our life. They are not creating any angry situation, or they're not leading to any violence as of now. Or then they could also become violent. Or they could have afterlife. For example, a conflict that we have solved, but in our memory, we still remember, oh, we had a conflict like this. That means you are likely to fall back again. The fear is that you had conflict and you could relapse into conflict. So conflict also is being attended to increasingly. In fact, many people believe that wars are just tip of the iceberg. The iceberg, big iceberg, is actually conflict. And it shows up sometimes. Sometimes you only need to just shout at each other. Sometimes you need to kill each other. You know, this is how conflicts become violent sometimes. Again, many people have done stages of conflict, early onset of the conflict, then the peak of conflict, then recession of conflict, etc., etc. Conflict fundamentally requires two parties. Or what is conflict in simple language? Conflict is when two parties are trying to pursue contradictory interests simultaneously against each other. For example, if there's one parking space, two people are trying to park their car at same time, then there is conflict. For example, if one person comes on Monday and other comes on Friday, they park there, no conflict. But if they're trying to park the car at the same time, so two parties pursuing contradictory interests simultaneously is what creates conflicts very often. And conflicts, as I said, can stay dormant for a long time and then suddenly could become active and could become less active again, could become resolved again. And you could see them coming back again after they were resolved. So sometimes people say conflict resolution is perhaps utopian term. Can conflicts be resolved? Conflicts cannot be resolved because even a resolved conflict still is there in our memory. So therefore, many people talk of other strategies. Conflict management, for example, conflict prevention, for example, conflict regulation, for example, conflict transformation. In fact, conflict transformation is drawing much attention now, which means that we may be finding that we have a conflict because we have misunderstood the reality. And if same reality is explained to us differently, maybe we both agree. So, no, we have no conflict now. We perhaps misunderstood each other. So how that transformation is to be achieved, since I have only 1 minute, is often through change of narratives. And one easy example is how China talks about Taiwan. The first great leader who said, I will liberate Tibet, and he had military to liberate Tibet. He wanted to liberate Taiwan. He could not liberate Taiwan. The next leader said, no, we want to integrate Taiwan. We don't want to liberate Taiwan. We want to integrate Taiwan, which meant the same thing, that they want to unify with mainland. But the narrative changed, the semantics changed. From liberation to integration became the word. Then the next leader came, said, no, we are not interested in any physical occupation. We only want to win hearts and minds. So how narratives can change and transform our imagination of the conflict is, John Paul Lederach is a big name if you are interested in reading more about conflict transformation. I think let me stop here because otherwise I'll keep endlessly talking. I want to definitely hear your fellows. If they have any specific question, then I can try to answer those. Thank you. Let me stop here and back to Priya.
Thank you so much, sir, for your illuminating talk on diverse interpretations of peace across cultures and theories. Your discussion on the evolution of peace from ancient notions of harmony and inner tranquility to modern debates on realism, constructivism, and critical theory was both profound and thought-provoking. The exploration of cybersecurity, freedom, and the challenges to inclusivity added a contemporary dimension to the discourse. So now I would like to invite the chair, Vibhuti Patel ma'am, to share her remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Sir, very palatable and very persuasive style in which you have explained various theories of peace. Currently, at 48 geographical locations on this planet, wars and conflicts are taking place. So what can the diplomats and both state and non-state actors do to ease the situation and to ensure global solidarity and transnational solidarity?
Thank you so much. I appreciate your question and your concern for so many wars going on around the world. Actually, each institution sometimes has a different definition of what they consider war to be. And the most ambitious, for example, is a definition given by Uppsala University that believes that if in a conflict 25 people have died, they count it as war. So different countries, first of all, count and understand war differently. The agreed definition of war is use of authorized and organized violence by a sovereign state, at least one sovereign state. Other side could be the civil war, could be rebels, could be insurgents, and so on. What is important for us to understand is that because of increasing global connectivity in the world of cybersecurity. World is so connected that each one of us get impacted by war. In ancient times, wars were something that was done far away. Usually, only the villages that came on the way got impacted. Other people sometimes did not even know that the kingdom was at war with neighboring kingdom. Now, wars impact every one of us. Even the war which is far away, for example, Ukraine war, has led to shortages of food, fuel, fertilizer, and finance. And many people, many experts have related chaos in Sri Lanka and Pakistan to Ukraine war. So I appreciate your question as to not only what states can do, but what also civil society can do, what we can do to make sure that these wars are mitigated, if not terminated very quickly. I think best thing we obviously can do is to increase awareness. Be aware of what is happening, why is that happening, and how can that be put an end to, and create that environment, because now most of the world is a democratic world and citizens are also voters and they can influence their national leaders to show greater interest in resolving problems which may not look like their problem. For example, India is trying to resolve Ukraine war situation, and how India and each nation can also commit resources. We send humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. All of us should understand that we have responsibility to send humanitarian assistance to Gaza, send humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, and so on. So advocacy, understanding, I think, is what we all can do at our level. And as voters, make sure our leaders pursue peace, because peace is indivisible. Peace broken at one place is peace broken at everywhere. So we are all in a connected world, and therefore I think each of us should do whatever we can at our level to make sure these wars are at least mitigated or their impact is mitigated. People who are suffering on the ground are at least aware that there are sympathizers around the world. There are people who feel concerned around the world, not that world has forgotten them. At our level, we can do that, but plus I'm sure states are the main actors here. And states right now in Rio de Janeiro are discussing Ukraine war. President Erdogan has come with the proposal for a ceasefire on Ukraine war. So let's see what happens. But these wars are a reality in that sense. And partly these are reality because we have very diverse imaginations of what we want to do. We sometimes don't understand each other. And sometimes I joke in my class, you have conflict because you love other guy. And you're trying to make him or her enjoy things that that person does not enjoy. Because you think, I enjoy this, I enjoy sweets, let me feed sweets to my friend. And your friend may not like it. So lack of understanding is what creates conflict and war. And same lack of understanding is creating these 48 conflicts that you just mentioned. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Very
ma'am.
empowering us.
Now I would like to open the floor for Q&A session. Participants can either raise their hand or type their questions in the Q&A box or chat box.
I think there is a question in chat box if you want to read it for me.
Yes, Shabnam ji ask, sir, how do we balance the need to critique harmful practices with the fear of being perceived as culturally insensitive or discriminatory, considering that modern conflicts are often ideological as much as they are physical? How can peace building efforts address these tensions effectively?
Thank you. Very smart question indeed. What is happening around the world is we are using the pretext of ideologies to pursue our hardcore national interests, which are very often regime interests. These are regime interests. They are not national interests very often. And regimes want to camouflage their selfishness by explaining that in terms of ideology. Most of the world, because of the cyberspace connecting us all all the time is becoming increasingly transactional. In fact, if you see growth of human beings over a period of time are becoming more and more and more rational beings. And therefore, relationships are going to be increasingly transactional even among human beings, and so also among nation states. But sometimes they use this facade of ideology to explain that they're pursuing a conflict in the name of ideology, because that helps in building the support system. The whole nation is building to stand up for an idea. For example, the first time we saw war being fought in the name of an idea is in the 18th century, when wars were fought by French in the name of liberty, equality, fraternity. Before that, all wars were fought for stealing the neighboring king's princess, or taking somebody's land, or defeating somebody's growing army, becoming powerful. Those were very material issues. Ideas leading to conflict, ideas leading to war is from 18th century onwards. And that is why even current conflict, sometimes it may be the personal whims and fancies of a leader who wants to do something and leave a legacy in his name, but he wouldn't tell you that he's doing that. He will say he's trying to protect an ideology. And therefore, that is to me largely a pretext rather than the real reason. And we should call it. We should call it out at whatever levels we can. And if we stand to bear some cost for it, then be it. But that's a reality that we should be able to call it out, that this is not the real driver of the conflict. The real driver of the conflict is personal whims and fancies sometime, or regime security, or some other such reason, rather than really ideologies leading to the conflict. Those times are gone. I mean, Cold War, rigid Cold War time was the time when we had what we used to say irreconcilable ideological differences between Soviet Union and United States. That period is gone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other participants would like to raise a question?
Yes, Aditi, please go ahead. Or Kushala Simhaji. All right. Yes, Aditi, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for your insightful lecture. So, this thing got me thinking that as much as nuclear deterrence is emphasized, this advanced tech, AI, cyber warfare, like it has already created fractures in societies. I mean, it would lead to dangerous conflicts. And tech would always stay 10 steps ahead of humans, I mean, our regulations. So, as young scholars, should we hope that the same old school solutions, the so-called old school solutions like social cohesion, capacity building, socio-economic development to address deprivation would contribute to peace? And there's another question. Um, I mean, the internet bans in Manipur, in Jammu and Kashmir. I'm from Jammu, so
Okay.
what happens is if there is some conflict in Kashmir, I mean, sometimes it's very micromanaged. They would shut the internet in some specific area, and but depending on the situation, they would include Jammu region as well, which is mostly peaceful. So I mean, it reflects kind of a firefighting measures. I mean, it's not conflict transformation. So I was thinking, if this mass surveillance, internet bans, I mean, fact check units, control on social media, is it also now an extension of state violence? Or, I mean, would the peace building theory undergo evolution in this regard? So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining and for your question and comment. I think ideally speaking, surveillance state is definitely infliction of violence on individual liberties. Except that in unusual circumstances, so for example, in times of war, particularly in conflict zone where war is happening, states sometimes can take unusual measures, but they cannot become routine. They have to be only exception, not the norm. And therefore, that fight of national security versus individual liberty is a constant fight going on around the world, particularly visible in case of cyberspace. We notice that repeatedly that debate comes up. I forgot your other question was about, I think, technology. Yes. For me, technology is a juggernaut which is unstoppable. Humans will continue to devise, unfold, develop new technologies. But what is significant is technologies are always neutral, whether it is a pen or it is laptop or it is anything that you can imagine. Technologies are not value loaded. Our usage of technology is value loaded. Now, for example, I try to remember, I forget the name of a great scholar after Second World War who said, technology today can remove the poverty from face of earth, but politics and society will not allow it. So social segregation, political discriminations will sometimes make us do technology and use technology in a fashion that may not be optimal, that may not be most constructive. Sometimes part of it will be destructive. For example, the biggest technological revolution of 20th century of nuclear science was used only for building the bomb. I mean, it could do so many other things. Nuclear revolution could have solved millions of problems that we are facing today, from medicine to power generation and so on. But we only focused on destructive part of the technology, of focusing on building the bomb. And therefore, immediately people who had the technology said, we will not give it to anyone. So technology of AI likewise has both potential of becoming destructive and becoming constructive. It is for us as society, as human beings, eras, and our political systems that will decide whether AI will be productive or destructive. Already there is a division. For example, United States is the most worried country about disallowing any integration of AI with nuclear weapons. Last year, when Congress could not agree upon a legislation, President Biden issued an executive order disallowing integration of AI into nuclear technologies. He started a dialogue with Xi Jinping of China that we should together emphasize on not allowing AI to be brought into nuclear weapons, because it will encourage automation, it will reduce time of reaction, there could be mistakes, ensuring stability will be much more challenging. But some other countries like India, Pakistan, some of us, many other countries are thinking AI can also help us enhance security, safety, and upkeep of nuclear assets. It's not only destructive. So AI definitely is a very, very revolutionary, exponentially ground-changing, game-changing technology, which is being used in various ways of Internet of Things, of big data, or machine learning, and so on. But AI, just like many other technologies so far, will have both negative and positive outcomes. But technology itself is not value loaded. It's societies, it is the polities that will decide what we will end up doing with AI. I hope I answered both of your questions.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Francis Fukuyama, I guess, talked about technology and advancement. And due to the time constraints, we'll go ahead with the next section. Kushla ji, you could please put your question in the chat box. And thank you so much, sir, for inspiring and engaging talk with us. It's always a pleasure learning from you. We look forward.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on with our next session for today, I would like to invite Dr. Gladstone Xavier, a distinguished expert in peace studies and migration, for his session, Navigating Displacement and Peace, Policies and Practices for Refugees, Forced Migration and Conflict. We warmly welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah. It's such a pleasure to listen to Dr. Swaran, who I met just last week in Delhi. And it's a pleasure to be with you all as well. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. And in the next 30 minutes, let me just paint a broad picture, a broad canvas on what this means in terms of displacement, refugees, and various other areas. Now, just to give you a brief idea, displacement comes in all shapes and sizes, and it comes in the large framework of forced migration. And forced migration for us is anybody who is forced to move from their own to another, whether it is in search of economic benefits, that's also today classified as forced migration, or people who are moving due to conflict, or people who are moving due to natural disasters or human-made disasters. So a whole range of things why people move. Now, because people are moving, people are on the move always in search of something. Now, there are people who are voluntarily moving as well. For example, people who are migrating from one country to the other, or moving from one place to the other when it's a voluntary choice. So that there's a choice, and when there's no threat and when there's no risk, then that's not forced migration. When there's a threat and when you're risking your life, then there is migration that happens with some kind of a force or coerciveness. It is in this context that we need to work on various contexts. First context is that the migration context, which is internal migration context, where one person moves from their own place, rural to urban, urban to rural, rural to rural, and urban. So these four categories are very clear. Now, in this, usually people are moving within the state. So when they move from place to place, there's no real serious threat unless there are sociological issues such as caste or such as religion or hatred that's involved in this moving. Otherwise, people, if they're moving voluntarily, for example, due to marriage, if somebody moves from one place to the other, then it's perfectly voluntary. And sometimes that can be coerced as well. But most of the time, during these things, there's no conflict involved. When there's a conflict involved, when you move from one state to another state, for example, now I live in Tamil Nadu, and there are a lot of people, migrant workers from many states living in Tamil Nadu. And when they come to Tamil Nadu, they seek safety, they seek livelihood, they seek various other things. Now, in some places, there are bonded labor. So, for example, I used to work with a project for bonded laborers. So these bonded laborers were people who came from Orissa or West Bengal or Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or Andhra Pradesh, from another state. You can name any state for that matter. And they just borrowed a little bit of money from the owner, and they were subjected to working in the brick kilns for a very long time. The same happens with Tamil people also. But with the interstate issues, what happens is, thanks that there is a proper law on governing interstate migrants. It's called the Interstate Migrant Workers Act, which gives clear guidelines on how people should be approached. And therefore, at least legally, issues are taken care of. Whereas on the other hand, when we look at migrants coming in search of work from other countries, or migrant workers going from India to other countries, or from different countries across, if you see them moving, that is what we look at as unsafe or unorderly and irregular migration. So mostly the campaign is for safe, orderly, and regular migration, whereas what is happening is this unsafe. So, for example, I work with refugees from Sri Lanka. A group of refugees a few years ago just gave me a call, and they asked me to find out what happened to a boat that left the shores of India, and they had not heard anything from their relatives. It was 20 days and 30 days, and they could not hear anything. So it so happened that a bunch of people took a boat, convinced by a group of traffickers, and they took this boat to Australia. They were promised to be taken to Australia. Now, it was very sad that the boat capsized and all of them had collapsed. The people died. In another case, we saw people who took these boats and called me from Indonesia. Suddenly a call from Indonesia comes and asking for a rescue mission. Now they're asking, they say that they are in Indonesia, in Aceh. The boat which was supposed to go to Australia failed, the engine failed, and there was no way to go, and they were brought to the shores of Aceh, and they were taken care over there in a kind of a very humane way, and a humanitarian aid was going to them. But then they cannot live there for long. So we had to go there and rescue them and bring them back to Sri Lanka. They could not come back to India. Now, why is this happening? These two stories simply tell us people move, one, as a result of desperation. This happens all over the world. across the world, we have close to 13 million people who are seeking different kinds of not asylum, but migration into other countries through irregular pathways. So these irregular pathways can be so different. And these irregular pathways can also affect the normal life of friends, families, and professions and various things together. So therefore, what is important is these irregular pathways can be contained only if there are policies that are taken care, which are welcoming people or which take care of people when they are in country. There are two types of policies. One is policies that take care of people that prevent them from taking these boats or other irregular pathways. And second is there are uh, there are laws in the countries which people go. That's something which is very interesting, how people are received. Now, today, the regular pathways oftentimes become very difficult for the poor and marginalized sections. If you're poor, if you don't have the money to pay for, and if you are living in a difficult situation, you probably cannot get to those countries simply because they will not give you a chance and you don't have the education to go and start a life again. But this is only about 100 years old. 100 years before this, things were quite different because the rise of nation states and the rise of borders has crossed this, has actually made it very difficult to get across the borderlines. Now, this becomes very interesting and crucial when it comes to dealing with people through law. So, law itself is, as we know, is a double-edged sword. It can go this side or that side, depends on the place where you are. Now, this this takes us to another very important, interesting turn, where if the government of the day is very much concerned with the migrants, then the government can do a lot. But if the government is not in favor, it can demonize the migrants. For example, the most recently concluded elections in the US was, I think, was based on a few very simple points. One was immigration or migration laws. These migration laws where migrants were demonized. Now, there's what is known as seasonal migrants, migrants from South, from Latin America, or even North America, like Mexico, go into the United States during a season, whether it is plucking oranges, or whether it is harvesting, or whether it's working in the farms, things like that. They go during a season for 3 to 5 months and they come back. But then when the politics of the place is very, very fragile, then what happens is people tend to stay longer and there is much better livelihood in those places. So when the livelihood question is quite robust or very weak in one country and robust in the other country, they tend to stay back. Now that brings us to another question where what about the welfare of the migrants? Now this is a $1 million question. You need people to work for you and earn for you, but you will not spend for them. And that's exactly what happened in the US. Now, there is a huge dehumanizing of migrants that has taken place. On one hand, you have people coming in and US welcoming, and the Joe Biden government was quite magnanimous in welcoming the migrants and reuniting families and putting them to school. Whereas the business community, with the inflation, saw it as taxpayers' money going to freeloaders. Now, this became a huge point of agenda for the opposition to argue and get things done. Now, this also talks about a big discrimination against migrants because we want skilled migrants and unskilled migrants are not welcome. But if you look at any country in the world, close to 30 to 50% of the economy is run by unskilled people. And within the unskilled people, when you look at a migrant economy, it is run by people, about 20 to 30% of the people are those who go through irregular channels. The same thing does not apply to migrants who are in the Middle East. So shifting the focus to the Middle East, where we have a large number of Indians, South Asians living in the Middle East, but they go through regular channels, but they keep shifting. But there is not much progress in their lives. 20 years, you can work as a cook and you will retire as a cook. For 45 years, you will be a guard and you retire as a guard. So the career pathways for unskilled migrants is very, very limited and minimal. So the most important part right now is to make it more inclusive when we plan for working with them. So when this is made inclusive, when they are made part of the solution, then there's a very clear shift in the narrative. When the narratives change, what happens is something very interesting and beautiful happens. It changes for the better, and it changes for in order to improve life and livelihoods of people present in a particular country. So in order to do that, I propose, or there are already proposed, many solutions have been proposed by many authors, but the UNESCO and various others give some very interesting solutions. The first solution is you are invited to be part of a solution through inclusive consultations that are held pre-departure. So before a person leaves, there needs to be a pre-departure counseling, and a lot of things need to be informed to them saying that they have to be fairly treated. But then, unfortunately, what happens is there are countries that don't have inter-country agreement. The very famous case of the Sri Lankan young woman who was stoned to death in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, because one day when she was trying to feed the baby of the owner, the baby choked on the milk and died. So this girl, who was just 21 years old, was stoned to death. Now, this kind of harsh punishments are there. Yes, we all are very upset and sad for the baby that was killed, but then it was not her fault. The baby choked on the milk. So this is an accident. So for an accident, there is an intentional punishment, and also it was considered as gross dereliction of duty. But then there are countries like the Philippines that sign agreements with countries like the Middle East or the US, where the country makes sure that the receiving country follows a lot of these uh, rules and regulations. When these rules and regulations are followed, for example, minimum wage, definitive one day a week rest, and medicals are done once in 6 months, there's an agreement between the employer, the country, and the country that's sending. So there's an agency that's facilitating it. In case of violence, where one should go and report and how people should go and report. So I can go on with many stories where we have intervened. Now, what is very interesting is there are situations where there's not much that is happening within this time frame, given what's going on in this area of migration. There's not much of inclusivity in thinking, not much of inclusivity in planning. Now, how does this affect peace building? This affects peace building because when the countries are not having proper relations, when these countries are not signing these agreements or not taking these agreements seriously, then the relationship between these two countries are severely hampered. This can be between the Philippines and Saudi, or the Philippines and the UK, or various other countries. And there is no respect for these elements. Now, while we are thinking of it, then comes COVID. When a crisis like situation, when COVID hits, countries can go into deeply entrenched poverty spirals. One is Sri Lanka is a great example. Now you see Sri Lanka, a large part of its economy came from the remittance economy. And this remittance economy was very crucial because it came from the Middle East. When COVID happened, everything shut down. When everything shut down, the people, the migrants who were living in Saudi Arabia could not come back to Sri Lanka. They could not send money, and they had no resources. So it so happened the reverse started, where people from Sri Lanka, from whatever they could earn, sent to places like Saudi Arabia for people to be kept alive. Now, when they came back home, for 2 years, they could not go back. And all the gratuity, the pension, all these things were just lying there. These people are not compensated at all in any way, except for a few companies here and there did this. Now, this becomes another very important area for us to focus. Now, how does this work? This works because when people take leave, or when people get paid holidays, or when there are calamities that happen, then there needs to be some inclusivity in planning, and people need to be made uh, to compensate for these losses. That's one part. The next part is coming to refugees. Now, when refugees are there, when there is no visible threat, you know who a refugee is. A refugee is a person who moves from his own country to another country in search of safety because his or her life is threatened owing to reasons of race, religion, or various other forms of discrimination. In this now, in the latest protocols, they also include certain amount of gender and various other things. Now, when the conflict is over in a particular country, then what do? The refugees need to be able to return. Now, when the country that they're supposed to return does not have a conducive climate, then they continue to stay in the country of refuge. Now, thanks to countries like India, some refugees are taken good care of. For example, the Sri Lankan refugees who came to India in 1983 and then they went to Sri Lanka in 1990. All of them came back to India in 1991. Until date, for about 2.5, 3 generations, people have stayed as refugees and they're really well taken care of. But then there are some restrictions, but given the large scale of things, no problems. The same thing happens to Tibetan refugees. Now, here, what is happening is there is no real permanent solution. The first solution proposed by the UN is going back to your own country. That is known as voluntary repatriation. This voluntary repatriation becomes very important and crucial because it needs a concerted yes, and it needs a consensus response for people to go back. And because you need housing, you need livelihood, you need health, you need safety, above all, you really need a place where you don't want to come back to India as a refugee or go run anywhere as a refugee. But the concerns have changed. The concerns have altered today. The concerns of what it was in 1990 is not today. Sri Lanka has changed. India has changed. People sometimes find it more comfortable to live in a refugee context. And therefore, for them, there needs to be other policies of reintegration or integration within the civil society. And there are people who want to go abroad, use it as a springboard to move abroad. Again, since India is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention, India also does not have a refugee law. None of these are possible. So we go by domestic laws, and this gives room and scope for to be treated as different kinds of cohorts rather than being treated as just one set, one group of people. So each refugee receives a different kind of treatment depending on their own ethnicity and where they are from. Now, for that, there is a need to be inclusive and participatory planning. There is a very big need for participatory planning of refugees in their own solution. So you might have heard the famous saying, nothing about us without us. So this is the core of inclusivity. When we are talking about people, giving some breadcrumbs that fall below the table is not inclusivity. It's bringing them to the table to discuss peace, to discuss permanent solutions is what we call as inclusion. So inclusion sometimes is not a benevolent act. It's not a benevolent act. Inclusion is human rights. It's part of human rights, and it is something that is very, very real. And therefore, to conclude, I want to say there are 4 important points that are very closely related to inclusion, especially in terms of working together with people. First is stakeholder engagement. People need to be engaged in dialogical processes, in processes where they can be working together in finding durable solutions. Next is using participatory ways or pathways. Can we bring them to a discussion? Let's not non-prescriptive ways that can work together on that. Another key area, very, very key area is, do we have numbers? We do not have census-based data. We do not have concrete data to deal with this. So as you all know, conflict is caused by data. It can be a huge issue. Data can play a very, very important role when it comes to conflict. And so we are talking about, can we have desegregated data according to the age, according to the race, according to religion, or according to whatever socioeconomic background they belong to. And then we also look at, when we're looking at it, it is important to have an inclusive framework. Now, what does an inclusive framework mean? First, inclusive framework will have inclusive targets on how to come up with certain criteria of that. One of those ingredients could be inclusive language. What language do you communicate with and how do you build that? Next is looking at building capacities for peace. Now, different kinds of capacity building needs to be done, whether it is livelihood, whether it is community-based, or various other parts. The next point is very, very important is equitable allocation of resources. Can we allocate resources to these people according to their need? There is equitable, yes, but some people need more, some people need less. And that's why we talk about equitable resources. Now, this needs to be, as this is being accessed, the most important part is there needs to be pathways to make all these resources accessible to people. Otherwise, it'll be happening. Food will be delivered 3 kilometers away, and children over here will still go hungry. So that's not the way. Bring it closer and make it more accessible. Then the next is we're looking at monitoring and evaluation. How do you continue to monitor the progress? How do you work with people? And then we work on various areas. Now, inclusivity does not exist within just the confines of law, but it's the implementation also. So therefore, it's important to create a proper review process for the laws that have already been created. For example, if the Interstate Migrant Workers Act is there, somebody must sit down, come together and review it and making sure this is working. For example, if you have the Tribal Forest Rights Act, people must be involved in trying to sort out these things and bring together and have a discussion and recommend changes. And that's something which is happening. But these are some of the ideas that I want to actually go through with you. And then I'm going to take a pause for questions because I've been talking nonstop. I can go on for the next few hours. That's not a problem. But I want to take a pause and take some questions before I proceed. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So thank you so much, sir, for your impactful talk on migration and its multifaceted challenges. Your exploration of forced and voluntary migration, the sociological and economic factors involved, and the plight of both skilled and unskilled migrants was deeply thought-provoking. Your emphasis on inclusive policies, the role of international agreements, and the need for changing narratives provided valuable insights into addressing these critical issues. So now I would like to invite the chair, Vibhuti ma'am, to share her remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah. My first question, yeah, I found your lecture both which had head and heart. It was very, very touching. At the same time, your analysis was extremely robust. My first question that even in interstate in whole discourse on migration, women are absent. Even the law, Workmen's Act, it doesn't talk about that's one. So I think it needs a lot of, when we talk of inclusion, I think that has to be gender dimension has also to be brought in because even in the when the whole discussions on reverse migration also focused only on male migrant, while women who are migrating in a big way in the informal sector, their concerns were not highlighted. It was only Seva, Viego, and ISST, their researches and rapid assessment studies included that. My second question is about the current volatile arguments we have in the state of Maharashtra. Tomorrow we are going for election. And there is this study done by extremely prestigious institution, TISS. The Pro-Vice Chancellor of TISS has come up with a study and on the migration, which is titled as Illegal Immigrants to Mumbai, Analyzing Socioeconomic and Political Consequences. Now, this study has created tremendous volatility in politics also because all the politicians are also using this study. And at the same time, the researchers, academic fraternity, and the community-based organizations, they have challenged it and they have demanded withdrawal of this study. So what do you think, what kind of ethical responsibility we have as researchers and public intellectuals to do such study and put it in a public domain?
Thank you for that wonderful two questions. I think when we say inclusion, I think women are really part and parcel of it, and they should constitute the main part of the dialogue, going more than the 1325 agreements. But unfortunately, what happens is there is this deafening silence. Secondly, definitely there's a lack of sensitivity issues. Now, this state which welcomes a lot of immigrants. Now, in none of these policies, and which has more than 60% of the migrant workers are women workers, women migrant workers. So we're talking about that. We're talking about the women migrant workers. But then in terms of safety, in terms of security, in terms of them being not even welfare, I'm not even going that welfare. None of the laws are actually mentioning that women must be given this. And that's why there needs to be a very scientific, evidence-based approach to include migrants, disabled people with disabilities, and children with special needs and various other things. So it's sectoral inclusivity is very important. And when you're talking about women, it's not even sectoral, it's mainstream integration in various policies. That's clearly a no-go zone for anybody who's making the law. Now, I also went through the study very cursively. I did not, the second about the study in Maharashtra. Now, this is something which is deeply politically motivated studies. This is not the only study TISS has done now. They also did a similar study with refugees, and which became very detrimental to the life of refugees in Tamil Nadu. Now, these are very peripheral populist studies, as you will know as much as I do, or much more than that. These are called divisive studies, and using this kind of ideological backing with zero objectivity and calling them illegal immigrants. Now, we are not there. Mumbai, they must understand, is not on the planet Mars. And it is very much part and parcel of India. And it is very much part and parcel of people have a right to move, people have a right to live. But then again, goes back to the famous previous dialogues of the Shiv Sena government, which even talk about the land is for ours, this kind of Bhumiputra kind of dialogue that they're having. Now, these are very divisive. And talking about ethics, I don't even want to go there to that area simply because of two reasons. One, one, these are detrimental to human rights and humanity. Number two is they do not have the right and legitimacy to call themselves as public intellectuals. So if I had the authority or you had the authority, there needs to be some kind of self-censorship. You cannot have self-censorship and accountability to what they are publishing. The fact of the matter is where the money comes from and where the money goes and how things how they're able to navigate through these things. So that's something which we need to be very careful about. And over here, these issues need to be maintained and need to be very, very carefully tread upon. And I think the academic community, in no unsaid terms, has to condemn studies like this and then simply outright reject them. And we all know whose hands the Tata Institute today is in. So that is enough response for what's going on there.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to open the floor for Q&A session. Participants can either raise their hand or type their questions in the Q&A box or chat box. So while we wait, I have a question from you.
Shabnam has a
given,
question.
yes, sir. So given the rise of borders and yes, sir. Given the rise of borders and nation states creating challenges for migrants, how can governments and international organizations balance the need of national security with ensuring the welfare and inclusion of migrants, especially those using irregular pathways?
See, one of these things it's a heated debate between irregular and regular migrants. And today the world is going to, I mean, in a few years, there will be a huge, massive change in these policies, and there's going to be a sudden tilt. And why is the sudden tilt? I call this the sudden tilt because people will come looking towards the south for human resources because the developed north is having a huge dwindling effect in terms of population. Now, when this happens, there is going to be very, very different ways in which we look at. here, in order to look at national security question, if you look at it, there is no evidence or data to prove that national securities have been breached because of illegal migrants. There's just no data. Now, there is a threat to culture, they say, but culture is dynamic. Culture keeps changing, keeps altering itself as uh, years pass by with inculturation and various other things. Culture keeps changing, and people see it as a threat. And then these conflicts actually occur in the mind before they actually take place, and these threatening messages. So, therefore, one is not using this to kind of trump up these ideas. For example, look at the entire shift right. Europe is shifting right. America is shifting right. And what are they talking about? They are talking about demonizing the migrants. Oh, these illegal migrants are coming here and eating our cats and dogs. This is literally what the campaign in this debate, Donald Trump made the statement. But you know what? The whole idea is governments really need to make sure that these legal pathways are facilitated at an easier level. And also removing the threat. Removing the threat is very important. Usually, why is the threat issued? The threat is not real. The threat is only felt. It's a felt threat. It's not real threat. It's a felt threat. What is a felt threat? Felt threat is by perception. You feel that somebody is going to come to your house because they're different. They're going to come and steal your stuff. And you propagate it. There may be one incident or two incidents like that. But it really does not mean that migrants are coming. Now, historically and evidence-based, migrants of a particular generation have contributed so much more to the national development. There is enough evidence and data for that because they work much harder than regular people. So it is important to regularize these pathways and make it easier. If you make it easier, it's not going to become a burden of a particular country, but it's going to pave a foundation for making the countries better. In fact, that's what evidence is. So instead of people putting their lives at risk and also looking at operations, sovereign borders, and things like that, which really don't make any sense. 200 years ago, the same people were illegal migrants. History is going to repeat itself. Less than 100 years ago, people were occupying countries like Australia, and the land belonged to indigenous people. And what are we talking about in terms of regularizing it? So you go inside and regularize it for others not to become illegal. So you should take this not with a pinch of salt, with a rock of salt, so that we understand that from a completely different dimension. Yes.
Any other questions from the participants?
Yes, I think Shabnam ji wants to ask a question. Shabnam ji, please unmute and ask. Shabnam ji, are you able to hear us? I can see that you've unmuted, but we are not receiving any sound from your end. You can also put your question in the chat box or Q&A box.
Oh, she's typing in the meantime.
There are two questions.
Yes, ma'am.
She can't unmute. Satyam, can't you unmute yourself? Yeah.
There
Please
is
go
a
ahead. Yeah.
technical issue on her end, yes.
No, you are audible. We can hear you.
So while we wait for Shabnam ji, could you please tell in brief about the climate change induced migration, particularly from vulnerable regions, and how global policies could ensure the protection for climate migrants?
One of these inescapable factors is climate migration. In the next 50 years, this is going to play a very, very important role because we know that there are countries with huge populations or with sizable populations, and populations living on those areas will definitely be displaced. In take, for example, Bangladesh, the Sundarbans area. It can be even in India, a number of places. Now, as we talk right now, there are climate negotiations that are going on in Baku, in Azerbaijan. And in this COP29, the key is not about just reducing the carbon emissions, not about work, but then it's also about inclusivity. But you'll be surprised that not a whole lot of dialogue is taking place on these things. There's not much happening there. If you read the entire document, which I've been assiduously going through in the last few days, I see that very little is being spoken about displacement or welcoming people who are vulnerable. Now, this is what we think, that there needs to be a climate action plan for migrants, which needs to be inclusive. Now, from the NGO sector or from the other lobbying sector, there is a lot of very interesting points that are coming up. Now, for example, there are organizations that work on climate change that are advocating what is known as active migration protocols. These active migration protocols are protocols for climate migrants to move into countries that are slowly changing, not where climate change is not as rapid, and then settle down in areas and redevelop them. Now, there needs to be a concerted effort. Now, if you see, for example, climate budgeting was rejected in Baku. Just day before yesterday, climate budgeting, people said we cannot go based on climate budgeting, including India rejected it. But climate budgeting becomes very important when people are being displaced. Now, Chennai, for example, the city where I live in, we are in the coastal area. Now, when this will, we will see huge displacements in the next 50 years if we don't pay attention to this. So alternative places, alternative inroads, and also looking at technology, which will be able to, one, rescue people, will be able to transport people, three, will be accommodate people, and four, will be able to provide livelihoods and sustainable work livelihoods and sustainable lives. So these things need to be really borne in mind. So when we talk about climate refugees, though the numbers are very, very small right now, in the last 20 years we've been talking about. In fact, in Rio conference in 92, the Rio conference itself mentioned about displacement due to climate. At that time, very few countries paid heed to it. But 20 years later, 20 years later, in 2002, the voices became more prominent. And now the voices are becoming very, very strong. And countries like Japan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines are really taking the lead in saying, look, we are the ones who are going to be severely affected. Now, what is the solution? And there are countries like Seychelles, islands in Seychelles. There are islands in belonging to UK, like Diego Garcia and various other parts of the world, and the South China Sea. These are areas which need very, very serious concentration. But in terms of policy, there's not much being discussed. Yes, it is on the agenda, it is on the table. I'm happy it's made it to the agenda, but the deliberations are not really helping us to move on from there. That's where it stands as of now.
Thank you so much, sir. I guess there is a technical issue on Shabnam ji's end. So, due to time constraints, we'll move on to the next session. Thank you so much for your engaging and inspiring talk, sir, and for raising such critical issues. And we look forward to having you at future IMPRI events.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dr.
Next, we move on to our third discussion for today. I would like to invite Professor Ceena to discuss the essays and research article writing. We are delighted to have you with us, ma'am. Over to you.
Dr.
Am I
Ceena,
audible?
please. Yeah, but please adjust your screen. Your face is visible only half of it.
Is this okay?
Yeah, yeah, this is fine. Now it's
So good evening, everyone.
good enough.
Dr. Xavier, I want to remind we are coming from a city of Mumbai. So what Madras is going to face, same, our future is also the same. It's not going to be different for us also. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes.
And I just want to add, the entire Gulf region was developed only because of the migrants.
Correct.
Today we have such tall buildings over there. It's only because the migrants who have put in so much of effort. So we cannot forget them. Yeah. With this, I want to thank Dr. Vibhuti Patel and IMPRI for inviting me for this talk over here. And the title, the paper given to me is Research and Essay Writing. Thank you. I want to share. I'm sharing my article. Is it visible?
Yeah. Only thing, you make it a slideshow mode.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. It's done, no?
Yeah, now it's fine.
Is it done? Done? Yeah. Now, we all know what is a research, but I've taken few examples of Clover, Barsley, and Redman and Murray over here. According to Clover and Barsley, what is the research? So, a process of systematically obtaining accurate answers to significant and pertinent questions by the use of scientific method of gathering and interpreting information. So, when we look at these, and one more definition I've taken is of Redman, research is a systematized effort to gain new knowledge. So, research is what primarily gaining new knowledge. And how are you going to gain this new knowledge? Through a process of systematically obtaining accurate answers. And these new, and what are these questions? Questions should be pertinent questions and significant questions. So, three things we have to remember over here. First, it has to be new knowledge. You're creating something new literature. Then we are going to discuss some important and pertinent questions. And how are you going to find answers for that? By undertaking a systematic and scientific method. So this is the requirement of research. Now, what is a research paper then? You have a journey of your conducting research. When you write all your experiences, that becomes your research paper. So it is basically an academic writing that provides all your analysis, all your interpretation, and all your arguments and all your in-depth research. So this becomes a research paper. Now, there is a difference between a research paper and an essay. Now, what is as I said, what is research? Finding new and using scientific methods and systematic methods. Whereas when it comes to an essay, it is my perception, my viewpoint about a particular subject. For example, tomorrow is Maharashtra, all know there's election going on in Maharashtra tomorrow. What's my viewpoint about these elections? What are the factors which influence primarily in this election? That becomes my essay. There is no scientific method used, nothing. It is just my viewpoint. So there is a difference between a research and an essay. Research is something new, and answers, we get the answers through scientific and systematic methods. Okay. Now, the next question we have to see is, what are the features of a good research? First, it should use dependable data and sources. For example, I deal with my PG students and my undergraduate students. One of the source of data they use is encyclopedia or your Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a big harm because that is not a dependable source. And as we all know, it can be edited by anyone. So the first thing is that the data should be dependable. I should be able to verify the data. What is the next? We'll be dealing it, that you will have to use the standards of scientific method. In the course of the lecture, you will see what are the scientific methods. Next is apply ethical standards. For example, I am doing a research about the implication of a medicine given to some patients. I have to see to that they under no circumstances they are harmed. So ethical standards, the privacy of the respondent, all that should be taken into consideration. Next is every research will have some limitation. You should not forget that. So when you are making a research, see to that the limitation also should be highlighted. No research will be there with no limitation. There will be limitation, which also should be highlighted. One of the things what we see in the research is that limitations are not pointed out. Next, it has to be holistic. It should be multidisciplinary. I come from a discipline of economics, but when I'm doing any study on economics, I have to talk, for example, I have to take sociology into consideration, I have to take politics into consideration, I have to take history into consideration, then only it becomes a holistic. So please, we should not only engage in economics, but we should take all the other disciplines also into stride. So this becomes our features of good research. Now, there are different types of research. For example, exploratory research. What is exploratory research? For example, today I went to a doctor. The first thing what he asked me is the basic question, because he doesn't know anything about me. So is there anyone who's having any illness in your family? So in exploratory research, you're getting the basic information. Then comes your descriptive information. You're getting the characteristic of the population. You ask what, question, when, but you do not answer why, what, how. All these questions are answered. Then exploratory research is that evaluation. For example, Manrega is there. What is the impact of Manrega on women empowerment? So this becomes exploratory research. Evaluative. Then there is a cross-sectional research. For example, opinion poll was conducted by many of the journalists where Maharashtra election is concerned. What they did, the same point of time, data was collected from different districts of Maharashtra. Similarly, Jharkhand. So that becomes at the same time you are conducting research across the population. That becomes a cross. Then you have longitudinal research. You are collecting data for a decade or whatever, or for 100 years, whatever. That becomes a law. Then comparative research. For example, there are different policies which are introduced by the government. So which policy is good? Which policies, for example, the education policy, or which education policy of Maharashtra can be compared with the education policy of Kerala or Tamil Nadu. So you are doing a comparative. Then becomes a qualitative research, where you are talking about behavior of an individual. In-depth study you are doing. Quantitative, if you want to collect data, then becomes your quantitative research. Then there is a mixed method research, where you include both the qualitative and quantitative research. This comes the different types of research. Now, okay, we know what are the types of research. Next is we have to write a paper. Now, writing a research paper, there are more than 10 steps. Now, what is the first step over here? Understanding your assignment. For example, your assignment is, you have to submit your paper within 15 days. So depending upon the timeline, you will have to decide the topic. Because, for example, within 20 days, there is a limitation. How many people I can meet? The primary data, maybe at the day, maximum will be 10 or 15. It cannot be more than that. So the first thing you have to understand is the due date, when I have to submit the assignment. What is the purpose of the assignment? For example, it is a PhD or whatever. So you should know the purpose of the length, the requirement, which data are you going to use? Are you going to use a primary data? For example, there are some research assignments where you have to use only primary data. But there are some assignments where you have to use only the secondary data. What will be the format? How will be the mode of submission? All these things should be understood at the first glance itself, because many a times at the end of the submission, there is a possibility your authorities may reject. So the first requirement is understanding your assignment. For example, this is what has been given by IMPRI for the research students over here. So all this has to be taken into care. What will be the style? What will be the spacing? Whether you have to use Times New Roman or your Vardhana, everything is listed out. What will be the date? Everything will be listed over here. Next is deciding. The most important thing is the research topic. In any research topic is the most crucial thing. Now, how do you get onto the research topic? You can talk to your teacher, you can talk to your friends, you can talk. So this is what, then is, what is the contemporary research going on? What are the research students doing currently? That can be, or you have read some paper and you feel there is a research gap, you can do research on that. So primarily, you can talk to your friends, you can talk to your teacher, you can identify what is a contemporary area of research, and from wherever you have read, if there is any research gap. Over here, do some preliminary. After deciding your research topic, what is the next step? Okay, I want to do research on inflation. Inflation, what India is experiencing inflation, or there are many countries who are experiencing. That's a big topic. Out of that, I have to decide a smaller topic. For example, I want to study the impact of inflation on the middle class people of Mumbai. So that becomes my specific issue. I'm only talking about the impact of inflation which India is facing, and what is the impact on the middle class people of Mumbai. So, because after reading, I realized there is no much study done on the impact of inflation on the middle class of Mumbai. So that becomes my research gap. So after understanding the research topic, you will have to decide what is a smaller topic of that. And when you're deciding the smaller topic, you have to first, as I told you, what is your assignment? You have to keep that in mind, because if your assignment doesn't, if your timeline is small, you have to decide your research topic depending upon your assignment. Okay. So now a few research topics I have given over here. Impact of social media on teen relationship, impact of microfinance on women's empowerment, role of social media. These are the few topics which I have listed over here. Okay. So your research topic is done. Next step, as I told you, it is you have to conduct a preliminary research, because you have decided your research topic. You have to understand more, because you have to write your thesis, you have to write a thesis statement, you have to write your hypothesis, you have to write your questions. So you have to understand what others are talking about it. So you have to read, review articles, research paper. From there, you will get an in-depth knowledge about what is about this topic. Okay, so the next step is reading the area of research you have chosen. Now, what is the importance of this step? You can gather information, you get some idea, clarity about your statement. If there are certain myths involved, you can debunk those myths. You can, now, later on, you have to gather a lot of other information. So here we will understand from where are you going to gather all those information. So this stage, the step 3 will help you to understand all this. Step 4, as I told you, first you have decided the research topic. Next is either you write your thesis statement, you write your research question, or you can write your hypothesis. Now, what is a thesis statement? Basically, it is a sentence or two which summarizes the main idea of the paper. And what research, if I just read the thesis statement, I will get an idea, an outsider will get an idea, what is your research all about? I don't have to even read the abstract. Looking at the thesis statement, your outside person should be able to understand what is all you are going to do or talk about in this research paper. So as I told you, sentence or two that summarizes the main idea of the paper. Now, it should be clear, it should be straightforward, it should not be ambiguous, it should be correct. There should be no loose words over there. It should be specific, it should be concise. Again, I have given you the topic and the thesis statement, like impact of social media on teen relationship. Thesis statement is what over here? While social media fosters connectivity among teachers, it simultaneously diminishes the quality of face-to-face interaction, leading to decline in the ability to form deep, meaningful relations. This becomes your thesis statement. So first is your research topic, then becomes your thesis statement. From this statement itself, a person will get a clear idea, what am I going to talk in this paper? So if this is not my area, I need not read it. I do not have to read my abstract also. Before that, I get a clarity. For example, impact of microfinance on women. It's a big area, but in that, what am I going to do? Microfinance empower women in rural area. So I'm going to talk only the rural area. I'm not going to take the urban area. So if a person wants to talk about urban area, need not look into this research paper of mine. So I have similarly given some more thesis statement over here. Next is what research question. Okay, you are not comfortable writing a thesis statement. You can go with your research questions. Now, what is a good research question? It should be original. As I told you, what is your purpose? New questions. You have to address new question. You do not have to address old question. So it should be original, and it should be wide applicability to the broad scientific community. This knowledge, what you are creating, should be used by future generation. Next is, generally, you should only address few questions. There should be no multiple question. For more question, you can write more research paper. So as far as possible, you should concentrate only on core research questions in a paper, because it becomes helpful for you to collect data. Next is what I have given certain research questions over here. The same, like while thesis is what? While social media fosters connectivity among teachers, I have given some questions. In what way does social media fosters connectivity among teachers? To what extent did reliance on social media affect it? So these few questions I have given over here. The third thing is constructing hypothesis. So from the same research topic, I have developed a thesis statement, I have developed research question, and I have already also developed hypothesis also. So now depending upon you, what you want to construct, you want to construct questions, you want to construct hypothesis, or you can construct your questions as well as your hypothesis. Now, what are the hypotheses I have given? Teachers who spend more time on social media, teenagers who spend more have lower quality face-to-face interaction compared to those who use social media less. These are my hypotheses, which I have generated from my research topic. Now, the next thing is what your supporting evidence. Okay, you have decided your thesis statement, you have decided your research question. The next question, what you are going to see is, your questions are ready. Now you have to find answers to that. For finding answers, what are you going to do over here? You have to do collection of supporting evidences. What is supporting? Read. This again, reading comes into the picture. First, you have done your preliminary investigation is over. Now you are going to your descriptive research over here. In that, what are you going to take care about? First, here the actual research is done over here. You should know already your direction of the questions are already given because you have listed your question. You should select the specific information which you are going to utilize in your article. You should list out all your citation because all this citation you will be using it later on in your bibliography. So you should only collect all the information from wherever you are reading. First, make a bibliography of that, and whatever is relevant, you keep it, and less others you can discard. So you have your questions are ready. You have collected material to answer the question. And next step is writing the research paper. Now, generally, your research paper, the outline of the research paper is first you need an abstract, which will be of 150 to 200 words. Then your typical research paper has 4 segments. What are the 4? That is your introduction. Then you have a method, result, and discussion. And every section has objectives, its own objective. So what is an abstract? As I told you, it consists of 150, 20 words. It gives you in brief what are you talking about in your research paper. Research paper can be of 3,000 words, 4,000 words, depending upon your assignment. What is the introduction? In introduction, what are you going to include? You are going to talk about the historical background of the area of investigation. You're going to talk about the definition. You're going to talk about the key terms, what you're going to use through your research paper. Then why are you doing it? What is the significance of the study? Next is review of literature. As it has to be a scientific method. So you have to include what others have spoken about your area of study. You are going to discuss what other researchers have spoken about this research topic. After doing the review of literature, you have to identify the research gap. This is the most important. Why are you doing this research? If existing knowledge is answering your question, then you do not have to do the research because the questions are not being answered. So you have to prove that these questions are not answered in the current literature. So that has to be pointed out. Next, as I told you in the introduction, you have to write your thesis statement has to be there. Objectives is there. Then your hypothesis, all that will be included in your introduction. Next comes your method. In method, all these questions have to be handled. What are the questions? First is, what is the research study all about? For example, as I told you, I was talking about inflation, impact of inflation. That you're going, why the study is required. You could have taken some other topic that you will talk. Where would the study be conducted? For example, I've been talking about Mumbai, so that the study will be conducted in Mumbai. What type of data are you going to collect? Are you going to collect the primary data or you're going to collect the secondary data? And from where can the required data be found? That also you are going to, and what will be your period of study? Again, depending upon your assignment, you will have to decide. Okay. Now, your sample design, you have to decide a sample now. In the sample, there will be different types of, you have a probability sampling and a non-probability sampling. You can use a probability or random sampling also. So that you have to decide. Are you going to use a purposive sampling or a judgment sampling? That has to be decided by you. Next is, any intervention are you using? For example, what is an intervention? A manipulation of the subject, or this are to examine the impact of the variable on a result is called an intervention. For example, as I told you, a new medicine has been developed. The medicine becomes your intervention. Na? So that you have to describe over here. Then, which is your dependent variable, which is your independent variable, all that have to be included over here. Okay. So next step is what? In the method, you have to answer from where are you collecting this data? What are your tools of data collection? Are you going to use a questionnaire? Are you going to use an interview schedule? Are you going to have a survey? Are you going to use a case study or a direct observation? All that have to be mentioned. Okay. So collection of data is over. Next is, how are you going to analyze the data? What statistical tools are you going to use? All that have to be mentioned in the method. So first is your I, introduction. Next is your M, method. And next comes your R, that is the result. In result, what are you going to discuss? First, whatever information you have gathered, that has to be tabulated, and the statistical analysis have to be shown in your result. And what are your key findings? You must, for example, inflation and the impact on the middle. I can say that the saving of the middle income has gone down drastically because of the inflation. This is my key finding. People are finding it difficult to save. Their saving has come down in the last 4 years. After COVID particularly, the saving has come down. This is one of my central research question over here, finding over here. That has to be mentioned. What are your secondary findings? All that will go in your result. Next is the discussion. Again, in the discussion, you are going to list out all your main findings of your study. You're going to compare your findings with the findings of other. For example, someone has done some research in let's take Madras. So you are going to compare whether the results are the same, whether the middle income is suffering in Madras the same way as the middle income of Mumbai are suffering. That you can compare. Next is what? If there is a research, hypothesis is there, you can accept the hypothesis or reject the hypothesis. That can be done. Now, what policy prescription also you can give? Okay, now you have found out the problem. You know what, so you can give policy prescription to the government. What action should be taken by the government in order to mitigate the problem? Now, what are your limitations of their study? What are the strengths of the study? And offer perspectives for future work. Now, as I told you, there are limitations. Your study is not complete. There are limitations. So you have to identify what study can be done in the future, taking your study further ahead. Next is the conclusion. So in the conclusion, what are you going to write? You're going to wrap up. A reader has to read it. Once it reads your conclusion, it gets a brief idea. What is the research all about? What are your main conclusion? Then you can restate your problem statement over here. You can summarize your overall arguments. Suggest the key takeaways from your paper over here. What is this step 7? So we have come to the step 7. First draft. In the first draft, what are you going to write? You are going to write a preliminary version of your research paper. You have to do the clear or logical arrangement of your paragraphs. In the paragraph, generally what you should have, it should concentrate on a single idea. One paragraph should not have many ideas. If there is, for example, I'm talking about types of inflation, I'm only going to talk types of inflation, or I'm talking about social media. In that paragraph, you are only going to talk about the different types of social media. So you should not include many things in one paragraph. In the first statement itself, I read the first statement of your paragraph, I should be able to know what all I'm going to discuss in this paragraph. So if I don't want to read, I can easily skip that paragraph. Now, step 8 becomes your second draft. In the second draft, what are you going to do? If you can rearrange your idea, you think you are not answering your questions, rewrite, everything can be done in your second draft. Now, what is the step 9? Scientific sources. I told you, this is a very important step over here. Whatever information you have collected throughout your journey, all that should be cited. Either you use an APA or whatever is the citation, style of citation mentioned in the assignment. So you have to check your assignment and what method of citation, style of citation has been asked by the agency. You have to look. What is the revision process? What is in the revision process you are going to do? Content of each paragraph, is there any continuity, or you're asking whatever questions you have listed first, or whatever hypothesis you have stated, all that have you answered? All that you are going to take. Is there any typo error over there? Is there any, is a heading proper, formatting proper, or all, is there any spell error? All that you are going to cover in step 10. So your entire paper should be included in 10 steps. And out of that, first is your research topic. And according to me, that is the most important area you have to work. You should decide a research topic where data is available. That should be the first. You may take up some research topic which will be difficult for you to find an answer. So whenever you are choosing a research topic, you should see to that the data is available. If the data is not available, please do not do research on that, particularly when the time period is very, very limited. Now, I will just show you one research paper over here. Give me a minute. I'll just share the screen again. Now, this is a paper which talks about the role of Facebook in shaping voting behavior of youth, perspective of a developing country. Now, can you see over here, there is an abstract. There is an introduction. In the introduction, they have spoken about the technological, political and technological development of whatever happening in Pakistan. Then they have asked the research questions. What are the research questions which will be dealt in this paper? Then literature review. So what is it? First, they have given a brief idea about the historical background of the topic. They have asked, they have listed out the research question. They have done literature review. They have done model of the study. What model are you going to include? That the methods, whatever we discussed. Then what the model they are going to use, that has been listed over here. Then methodology, what is the methodology that will be used? That has been listed over here. How will be the questionnaire? Afterwards, what results and discussions are listed over here? Respondents' age and gender, all that has been. So it is IMRD. First is your introduction, then it is your method, then is your result, and then is your discussion. So respondents' educational program, they have listed purpose and frequency of Facebook, effect of the Facebook campaign on voting behavior. These are the questions which was raised initially. So all that questions have been answered over here. So this is one of the examples I'm showing. So this is it. And if there are any questions, we can discuss.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your engaging in informative session on essays and research article writing. Your practical insights and expert advice has provided valuable guidance to our participants, equipping them with tools to excel in academic writing. Now, I would like to invite Vibhuti, ma'am, for her remarks.
Yeah. Professor Ceena, you have very lucidly and explained the research processes with giving so many examples. I just wanted you to clarify that do we need hypotheses in all types of researches?
No. It is not necessary either. For example, you can include a research question or it can be hypothesis. Depends upon the convenience of the student or the understanding of the student, whatever.
Yeah. So just give example.
For example,
adjust your screen.
Can I go back? I'll just show you the one which I just now shared. Can I
Yeah.
go back and show those questions?
Yeah, because it doesn't have hypothesis, it has questions. Yeah.
1 second. No,
That's right.
1 second. I'll just share that again.
And from your own researches, you have conducted innumerable
Acha.
researches. From that also you can share.
Acha,
Where
from
you
there you
used hypothesis.
I
yeah,
don't have
where
to go
you,
back. Okay,
yeah,
fine.
then which one, where you used hypothesis and where you didn't. For example, your study of evolution of market in Malad. That was a historical research.
Historical.
So which method? Yeah.
So for that, now for example, we are going, am I visible?
Yeah, you are visible now. Yeah, but only thing you adjust your screen so that
Yeah,
we can have a
1
full,
second, 1
full
second.
profile of yours. Yeah.
Yeah. For example, currently we are doing a research on veneration practices of different communities in India. So now here, what we have just listed out few questions. We want to show over here that income plays a big factor in veneration practices. So this is a simple, we have just listed a question over here. That is income playing a big role in the veneration practices? So this is a simple question. We have not developed a hypothesis over here. But for example, the inflation one, which I was talking about, I can say over here that when there is an increase, when the inflation, there is an upward movement in inflation, the saving pattern comes down. The saving of the middle class people come down. This is my hypothesis. So in the first, there is only a question. What I'm saying, income has an impact on the veneration practices of people of the different community. This is a question what I have listed. Whereas in the other one, what am I saying? That when there is a ticking up inflation, the saving of the middle class people are going down. This is a hypothesis statement which I have made. So there is a difference. First is question, where I'm not making any hypothesis statement, where over here I have made a hypothesis statement, where I'm saying I'm starting from a position, what? That when there is an inflation, saving comes down. Or
so this is the relationship between dependent and
the
independent
variable.
variable.
Thank you, ma'am. And the floor is now open for Q&A session. Participants can either raise their hands or type them in the Q&A box or chat box.
There are questions. Q&A there are.
Ma'am, I'd like to raise a question from you.
Yeah.
In the process of writing a research paper, how can one effectively navigate the challenge of synthesizing diverse sources while maintaining a clear and unique academic voice?
Can you just repeat the question?
Triangulation.
Ma'am, I asked if while writing a research paper, how can one effectively navigate the challenges of synthesizing diverse resources while maintaining a clear and unique academic voice?
First, as I told you, dependability. Whether your resources are dependable or not, that is what you have to check. If it is dependent, there's no issue. Na? If your resources are dependable and you can verify the data, or if there are no biases, first you have to, wherever you're collecting the data, there should be no bias. That should be the first requirement. So if there is clarity on that, wherever you collect the data, no issue.
But like qualitative and quantitative data, if you have both the types of data.
Both the types. So these are the things which there should be no bias, because you should be extremely careful, because the results of your study may change.
Yes,
if your data is not accurate, or if there is some kind of ambiguity or some kind of bias involved, you may get a total different answer to the question.
Thank you so much.
So from where you're collecting data has to be you should be extremely careful.
Okay.
So that is the first feature of a good research. From where are you collecting the data?
Any other participants would like to raise their questions? Yes, there are no questions now. So thank you again, ma'am, for the insightful session. And now I would like to ask ma'am, Vibhuti ma'am, if we could propose a vote of thanks.
I think first let me sum up today's discussion because we discussed so many important concerns regarding peace. So I think most important thing that emerged from the very first lecture was there can't be peace without justice, and we have to also expand the understanding of peace. It is not only peace as an opposite to war, but also the social security and the people's entitlements, no? The right-based approach. And in this, so as Dr. Nelson Mandela said, that peace is not just the absence of conflict. Peace is the creation of an environment where all can flourish, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, gender, class, caste, and any other social markers of the difference. So this is very important. The second presentation by Dr. Gladston Xavier, he talked about the migration, displacement, so many painful stories that we have had. And currently, let us not forget that according to United Nations Human Rights Council, there are 43.4 million refugees globally. These are the recognized registered refugees, that means 4 crore 34 lakhs. And the UN Refugee Agency is mandated to protect nearly 3 crore, that means 3 crore 16 lakhs million refugees and 5.8 million other people in the need of international protection, because in more than 40 locations on this planet, wars are being fought. Now, the third presentation, which is very important for your dissertation on peace that you are going to have, is as Dr. Ceena Paul's presentation on social science research. She has given us a in-depth understanding of types of researches, research methodology, research ethics, the logical flow of your research, and the authenticity of the data and ethical standards that you need to observe while conducting your research. Thank you very much. Over to IMPRI.
Thank you, ma'am. So I'd like to propose the vote of thanks.
We have a question from Abhishek ji. Ma'am, can we just take their question? Thank you
Please
so
go
much,
ahead,
ma'am.
Mr. Abhishek.
Ma'am, he
Good
has,
evening, ma'am. So,
Yeah.
am I audible?
yes.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question like how to frame questions to collect data for your own paper, because I am on a project right now, like I'm writing a paper, and there is no particular data to actually find out. So I have to myself collect the data so that I can prove that what I am researching about. So, how to frame that question so that my research paper has relevance uh, to the topic and stuff?
Um, First, you have to decide your research questions, because from the research question, your questionnaire will be decided. Have you decided your research questions?
Yes,
What
ma'am.
questions?
And
Have you
objective also.
objectives or research question, or have you decided? Depending upon that, your questionnaire will be developed. So the first requirement is deciding your questions or your objectives or your hypothesis. That will be the first step. Without there a clarity on that, you cannot create your questionnaire, because as I understand, you are working on a primary data.
Yes,
Is it that way?
yes, ma'am.
So first you have to decide your questions, because from where are you going to get the answer? From the questionnaire which you are going to circulate.
Yeah.
So the first step will be deciding the questions or whatever, objectives or hypothesis.
Okay. Okay.
Then again, your questionnaire should not be big, as all know, because it should be very limited question, very specific. Ambiguity should be less, because
Okay.
generally people are not very keen in filling. So you have to be very careful. That question should not be repeated, or there should be very clarity. Then only there is a possibility you will get right or good response.
Okay. Okay. And can I like tell you the topic on which I'm writing a research so that if you could help me out.
Yeah.
Ma'am, we are doing a research on disappearing of roots. Is it an option or an obligation seeing through the capitalist mode of production that India is on the path of for economic
Disappearing
growth?
of what you said, disappearing of
Roots. Disappearing of roots, an option or an obligation?
You mean because of globalization, people are moving from one place to other place? From that sense, roots
No, man,
is
not moving.
cultural roots.
Yes,
Culture-
cultural roots. Cultural roots.
disappearing of roots. What is the next one?
Cultural roots.
Cultural roots. Okay.
An option or an obligation?
Option or an obligation.
Yes.
Because of and cultural obligation there.
Because of the capitalist mode of production that we are using for the economic growth of a traditional country like India.
So basically, you're talking about that because of globalization or because of capitalistic mode of production, people are moving from one country to other country. Migration. Basically, you're talking about migration.
No, ma'am, they're forgetting their own culture. We are shifting our own identity.
You're only talking about culture.
Yes, only culture.
The impact of capitalist mode of production on culture.
Yes, yes.
Cultural roots.
Culture. So this will be a okay, fine. So you want questions on that. So this is becoming a thesis statement.
Yes.
In that, what specific questions are you going to ask?
Indicators of culture.
Sorry, ma'am.
What are the indicators of culture you are using? Language, dress code, food
Yes.
habits,
Yes.
then interpersonal dynamics, kinship network. So which are the indicators you are considering?
Indicators
That you have to define.
Our language. It is what do you say? Physical identity, dressing sense, and reduce of practices of our own culture.
So basically, you're saying capitalist mode of production. For example, the usage of English across the globe.
Yes.
That you want to say. So you have used language, and next is dressing.
Yes.
The Western dress, what everyone is using. That you want to say.
Yes.
If for that you are so, how many questions are you are going to use language?
What about the food? Food habits have also changed.
Exactly, ma'am. We will include that as well. Ma'am, we are looking for four. Like for now, we have four indicators: eating habits, the language, the dressing sense, and the reduce of our own cultural practices. Like we do not have time for our own cultural practices because we are so much busy and enhanced towards the continuous capitalist mindset of that we need to do something productive. Doing cultural practices remains as that we are wasting our time. So something like that.
I just want to add, as I told you, one of the study we are doing is the veneration practices in different communities. What we find, the youth of today don't know anything. They have forgotten the veneration practices. So again, this is because of this.
Yes.
So the new generation, if you ask the new generation, what are the practices followed in our community? Hardly. That has been our experience. Whatever discussions, whatever interviews we have conducted, this is what have been our experience, that the youth of today are not aware about the veneration practices which is followed in their own community.
Yes.
So now, food habits, don't you think so that rather than for a primary data, secondary data will be more useful over here?
Okay.
Because usage of English, for example, let's take India,
Yes.
has increased.
Yes.
So rather than going for a primary data, I personally feel secondary data will be more useful.
Okay, ma'am.
For example, PISA. Now, everyone is 20 years back or 25 years back, the concept of PISA came. Think about the shops which were there in Mumbai, hardly one or two. Now you look at Mumbai. Are you from Mumbai? You will be knowing this more better than me. That in each street, There is one pizza joint.
Ma'am, I'm not from Bombay, but I'm from Kolkata,
So again, the
metropolitan city.
same thing, the same change must have happened in your city also.
Yes, yes.
And for example, the dress sense, 20, 25 years back in your own city, the usage of dhoti must have been more.
Yes.
Now what is the state?
Jeans.
You can check the sales of dhoti. From there
Yeah.
itself, you'll be able to answer.
Okay. Yes.
Metadata.
Hmm?
Yes, ma'am. Got it.
So I feel more than primary data, secondary data will be more helpful. And it
Okay.
is not, I just want to, I feel it is not capitalist mode of production.
Okay.
More than capital, it is globalization.
Okay.
Vibhuti madam, what is your take?
I would say capitalist globalization because the mass production, because whatever was earlier available to only some people who could eat pizza. Okay. Now
Yeah.
everybody can eat with the construction worker, domestic worker, anybody can
Everyone.
eat.
And price also
Nice
matters.
Yes.
For 100, 150 rupees, one pizza is available. When pizza entered in Indian market, pizza was very expensive. So the pricing is also help for the masses to have this food.
And even the cooperatives, like you see Amul or any dairy, the product variations are there. You get all variety of cheese and all variety of ice creams and all variety of whatever you were getting in Europe and America. Now it is they are the Amul is exporting to industrialized world.
For the whatever. Everything is available.
Mozzarella and all. It is exported.
Previously, all this was imported. Today, Amul is, as madam said, Amul is exporting it.
More than 85 countries are dependent on Amul's exports, no? So product variation is also happened in a big way. Even the consumption of chocolate earlier, it was a status symbol to get once a month of that 3 rupee Cadbury. Now everyone it is sold in the local trains. Chocolates are sold and very variety of chocolates are sold in the local shop.
Kirana
shop also.
Previously, all this was available in department. For example, silk. When silk was introduced, silk was available only in the departmental store. But today, you go to any Kirana shop, silk is available. It was considered as a higher end product.
Mass production. That was also changed.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the guidance.
So I think you have to bring both the aspects, not only the negative one, because it also democratizes, no? The mass production also democratizes. It doesn't remain the prerogative of the elite. Anybody can have it.
I can give you an example, ma'am. In 1990, a TV was costing 16,000, a color TV. 1990, 16,000 was a big deal. Today, the same TV is available for 7,000. So that's the reason each and every.
And if you go by NFHS 5, NHS 4, NFHS 5, all these things which were considered to be luxury items, now they are there even in the bastis, no? Informal settlements.
You take a round of Mumbai bastis, hardly you will find a house which is having a black and white TV.
No, nowhere.
It is all color TV. Of course, I'm sharing Mumbai experience. I don't know what is the experience in Kolkata, but this is a fact. A mobile is available to, in my class of 140, mobile will not be only 10% of the students are not, and the students whom I talk are coming from a very poor economic background.
First generation learners.
So mass production has this positive impact also.
I think you'll have to do the weightage of both. No? So it has a democratizing influence at the same time. Certain things which are rooted in our culture, we are forgetting.
Understood. Understood. We'll surely integrate that part in the research.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering the questions in such great detail. So now I would like to move forward. And as we come to the end of second day of the Law and Public Policy Youth Fellowship, Cohort 4.0, Winter 2024, with the theme Inclusivity in Peace and Conflict Resolution, Rethinking Policy, Advocacy and Implementation, an online national winter school program, a 3-month immersive online law and public policy awareness certificate training course, and internship program. I, Riya Rawat, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI New Delhi. We are grateful to our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, and the experts for day 2 session, Professor Swaran Singh ji, Dr. Gladston, Xavier ji, and Professor Ceena Paul ji, for taking out their valuable time and for their thought-provoking insights on the topics. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you on day 3 of the certification course on November 25, 2024, featuring distinguished experts like Advocate Flavia Ignis and Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam. They will lead an engaging session on International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Be great to watch us later on YouTube. Listen to us on various podcasts or read our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Riya Rawat, madam, for conducting the session and moderating the session. So, thank you.